the Agile brand.
While entrepreneurs are often lauded with creating new businesses and ideas, it is more often the case that change agents working within organizations, or intrapreneurs, are responsible for innovation and seeing those new ideas through to completion. Welcome to the Innovation Economy Entrepreneurs Series. I am your co-host, Adam Chen, an independent change management consultant and current president of AmenityLink, a property technology company. In this series, you will hear stories and insights from leaders within organizations that have had the courage to create new ways to move business forward. To listen to the latest episodes or sign up for the Innovation Economy newsletter, go to innovationeconomy.show or click on your favorite podcast app to make sure you hear the latest episodes. And now, on to the show. I'm really excited to have two guests on today. We have co-founders of a company called Propify. We have Remen Okoruwa and we have Ben Keller. Welcome to the show. And why don't we start by having you both introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit about your current focus in property technology.
Yeah, so maybe to get things kicked off, Remen, I'm co-founder and the CEO here at Propify. My background is sort of an interesting one. I initially I grew up in Iowa. I was lucky enough to go to Harvard, where I actually started out as a pre-med, and then like many pre-meds, quickly found out that the call of medicine wasn't necessarily the call that I was hearing. I actually got really, really into business, and that through a series of career steps led me to founding Propify, where what we do is we help property technology companies integrate their technology with property management software like Yardi and RealPage, really the software that's core to the operations of apartment buildings.
Got it. And Ben, what's your role at Propify?
So as many of you listening know, if you are entrepreneurs, you don't really have roles. You just do what is in front of you. So like Remen, even though my title is different, do a lot of selling and marketing and finance and answering emails and working with legal. But official title is COO. Remen and I have known each other for a bit, which I'm sure we'll get into. But one of the similarities between us was also went to school thinking I was going to be a doctor. Quickly realized that was not the only path to success, and whether it was really convincing roommates or just some really bad chemistry classes, I quickly shifted gears.
That's great. Well, I'm really curious. You've both, as co-founders here of this startup, Propify, was entrepreneurship always part of the plan? You've obviously changed a little bit of your focus entering in school and then, entering in your professional careers, but have you always wanted to own your own business?
For me, entrepreneurship was something I sort of stumbled on later. While I knew I wanted to be in business, I think that the first thing that I was attracted to was working for big brand name companies. And I had the chance to do management consulting where we consulted for really a number of Fortune 100s. But what I quickly came to realize was that it felt like my impact when I was working for an organization with over 100,000 employees was relatively limited. And from there, I came to discover that entrepreneurship felt like it was both being able to tackle meaningful business problems, but personally have impact that was measurable and visible on a time scale that would be relevant, to me personally. And I think that like a part of what that ultimate attraction is the fact that, hey, like I'm doing it and I want to see I want to have the satisfaction of seeing my work tangibly impact folks. And I think that entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, for that matter, really delivers on both fronts.
Impact, yeah. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, so I never when I decided not to go down the path of medicine, entrepreneurship was not something that was painfully obvious, but maybe it should have been. So my dad owned his own practice. My sister later opened up her own practice. And so while very different focus, not necessarily a technology business, they were responsible for a lot of every aspect of the business's success. And like, that's what I grew up seeing every single day. Whether or not I associated it with being an entrepreneur or not. That's really what he was. And when I entered the business world, similar to Remen, like I envisioned myself working for a name brand company because I associated that with success. It was a badge of honor, like the school you went to, or whatever credential you could put on LinkedIn. But what I quickly realized is you were a cog in a machine, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if your eagerness to make a bigger impact or your curiosity kind of doesn't fit within that cog, it can become frustrating, or you sort of not necessarily get bored, but you find yourself not stretching your imagination or new skills. And so I kind of worked my way to realizing that what I wanted to do was be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, yeah. I think that resonates a lot with some of the other conversations I've had with folks around entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship. A lot of people, I think, stumble on it, or a lot of people kind of learn as they go and then naturally find kind of their sweet spot. Now, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit to how you two met. And, I know you both worked at HubSpot for quite a while. So I'm really curious, you both alluded to working within organizations, and I'm really curious about, what was that experience like working within a company? And I think, Remen, to your point, trying to make a difference, trying to make an impact, right? A lot of people nowadays are coming into the world very mission driven and want to align their mission and values with the company they work for. So what was HubSpot like? Did it offer you that?
Yeah. I will say that HubSpot was amazing in that sense, because it was probably the first company I worked with where the mission was front and center. And, I was also lucky to sort of see that mission evolve over time, where I think by the time we left, it was the goal of the company was helping hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of organizations grow better. And I think that there's something really powerful when you're part of an organization that's not just we create software that automates a workflow and that generates revenue so shareholders get a return on investment, but rather we're in it for the small businesses that we serve. And that sense of service was more than just lip service. Rather, HubSpot had a set of values that we talked about internally. And one of the things that always struck me was sort of like the order prioritization that all HubSpot employees were encouraged to take, where it was always serve the customer first, then you serve the company and your team, and it's really sort of putting yourself like last in that hierarchy as you're trying to think through what decision should I make in any one situation. And I think that having an organization that cared so much about helping small businesses, that sort of explicitly said, try to prioritize those small business customers over the organization's own priorities when those might come into conflict. I think that it really just inculcated in me the sense that you could be a really massive and successful company, and it doesn't have to be at the expense of those that you're serving. So that was something that really struck me. And I think as we do what we do here at Propify, I try to take some of those lessons and those values and make sure that not only am I sort of living and working that day to day, but try to hopefully bring that, make sure all of our employees and our team do the same.
Yeah. It sounds like HubSpot kind of had their stuff together a little bit. Now, Remen, you had mentioned you'd done some management consulting earlier in your career. I'm venture to guess you've experienced many a corporate culture. Was HubSpot a rarity? What was different about HubSpot than maybe some of the other experience you've encountered?
So, if I were to contrast this with any of the clients I served while in management consulting, I think a few things stand out. So one, HubSpot's a tech company, and it's a company that was only founded in 2006, 2007. So it's both a young company, but it also has a lot of young employees. So there's actually, fundamentally, there is a youthful energy that was present at HubSpot that if I were to contrast that with, let's say, some of the Fortune 100s I worked for, yeah, they have young employees, but those are really junior staff. The actual decision makers, you can comfortably count on them being in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, and beyond. Whereas at HubSpot, you had very senior executives who were in their 30s. And it wasn't that, and sort of the value you delivered was not measured by time served, but
Mm,
rather what experiences are you bringing to the table, what unique perspective, and can you and do you have a demonstrated track record of delivering value, and not just sort of like in your current role, but really growing with the role. And I think that that's one of the really exciting things, not just about HubSpot, but really fast growing companies like it. There are people who might have started out as a junior product manager on the team. And in fact, I'm gonna tell the story of my former manager who joined the company as a product manager on the team, and then over the years, as he was asked to just take on more responsibility, and as the organization continued to grow around him, he kept on leveling himself up to the point that he is now the head of product at the organization. And I think that those opportunities to spend a decade with the company and be one of the most junior people in the org, and then run the entire department that you previously were in, and now have effectively hundreds of people reporting up into you. You don't get that in some of these larger, more stable organizations. But
mm.
when growth is a part of the organization culture, and they actively are looking to promote from within and find the people who want to take on that next level of responsibility, there's so much. I think there's a lot of great opportunities that arise from that, and a lot of people really get a chance to strut their stuff.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost by happenstance, maybe not the reason or cause, but these young companies have kind of broken the paradigm of large enterprises, and maybe that just dovetails with the fact that it's a youthful culture because they're trying to do things differently and they're not ingrained right in their ways, maybe. So that's really powerful. Now, Ben, I might pose the question to you. Raman alluded to some of the things you're trying to implement here at Propify and carry forward. I'm curious to your perspective as COO. How are you trying to take the best of what maybe HubSpot offered and kind of replay that or innovate on that kind of process at Propify as you try to build this culture within your own company?
Yeah, I mean, Remen and I have spoken about this several times before, and we definitely agree on the things that HubSpot did really well that we want to take with us. Maniacal focus on the customer and making sure that they're successful because they're going to be our biggest advocates. And especially when you're a brand new startup, your product is not put together. It is not a polished gem, and so you need customers that trust you, and you gain that trust through constant communication. But also,
Hmm.
you want their feedback, and so you have to welcome the criticism. You have to welcome that communication channel because that's how you're going to make it better. And so that's one thing that they did very well. HubSpot, even as a publicly traded company, 100% of their support team was based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, one of the most expensive places in the country. And that was because it was in the same building as the product team, the engineering team, the operations team, and you were getting really high class quality talent from great universities in the area who had this opportunity to join the company as support and grow within the organization. And that level of commitment and expense, that was not a cheap thing to do, made HubSpot incredibly successful. And then kind of internally with employees, Remen alluded to the fact that we aren't just looking at people based on their tenure and their, collegiate accomplishments or their past experiences, but rather the ideas they bring to the table and the work that they get done. The main thing that we value, besides how we treat one another, is just getting things done, and it doesn't have to be staying up 24/7, but just doing the things that you said you were going to do and trusting that you will do those and maybe even go beyond seeing something that's a problem and tackling it, even if it wasn't sort of created as a ticket for you in our ticketing system, as an example. So I think those are two ways that we've pulled upon that HubSpot experience and try to incorporate it in what we're doing.
Yeah, something that just kind of dawned on me as I'm listening to you speak about this is that maniacal focus on the customer that you mentioned at the beginning of that response. I think through a lot of the episodes I've recorded and some of the conversations I've had, we've created this very broad definition of what an entrepreneur is, right? Right, someone that takes ownership, maybe innovates, right, and has overcome maybe some of the hurdles to put their neck out there, right, take a risk, right, within an organization. But this concept of customers, I'm curious, do you think you can turn a customer into an entrepreneur?
So one of the things that I have seen, and this is I'm just going to go back to like my time at HubSpot, is of finding ways to empower your customers to not just it's one thing to collect feedback from your
Right.
customers, but it's actually something slightly different to involve them and engage them in the product design process, in designing go to market strategy where they aren't simply a voice at the table, they're an active stakeholder being brought on board to guide the direction. And I think that when I think about how customers can get pulled into this concept of entrepreneurship, it's something that's pretty popular in startups today is this idea of design partners, where it's like, yeah, you're going to ask them for money. Yes, they're going to give you feedback, but what you're actually offering when startups run these design partnership programs, frequently what they're offering to do is say, hey, we value your opinion so much. You have just joined the product team here. And your unique, what you're bringing to the table is that you live and breathe the problems we're trying to solve. And we value what you say so much that we want to make sure that as we iterate our way towards building the best solution possible, we are getting your consistent voice as a part of that process. So I think that there's a lot of really great ways that customers and prospective customers can sort of facilitate this entrepreneurship by bringing their voice and their unique perspective into the business in a really structured and planned way rather than an ad hoc and reactive way.
Yeah, I love that.
I just kind of want to give a really great example of what Remen's referring to. No company did this better than HubSpot did. So a lot of companies have channel sort of like partnership channels where they sell or resell the software through, and it's an amazing acquisition channel. Those customers end up being more successful because they have these partners implementing that solution in those businesses. But there were some partners that we brought into the product decision-making process so closely that we had their cell phone numbers. I remember one gentleman by the name of Doug Davidoff. You can look him up on YouTube. And he would end up creating YouTube and LinkedIn content talking about the new features we were releasing because he was so involved in the creation of them. And when we were looking for inspiration or for feedback on something we were working on, he's someone we would turn to. And this is somebody whose business was fully built on HubSpot. He was not affiliated from like a contractual perspective, like he was not an employee of HubSpot, but he bled orange as much as any employee because he built his business off of the HubSpot ecosystem, and we in turn sort of included him in a lot of that decision making.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you like what you're hearing, I invite you to check out another podcast from the Agile brand. It's called B2B Agility, and it's hosted by me, Greg Kihlstrom. The B2B Agility podcast looks at the factors that drive success in B2B marketing, with a focus on the people, processes, data, and platforms that make B2B brands stand out and thrive in a competitive marketplace. You can find B2B Agility on this podcast platform or wherever you normally listen. Before we get back to the show, I just wanted to remind you to hit the follow or subscribe button on your app to make sure you get notified when new episodes of this show are available. Now let's get back to the show.
Some of this is me connecting a couple dots as I'm listening to you. I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago to sit on what they called at the time a client board for an HR tech company. And, I'm sitting here ingrained in entrepreneurship, and it wasn't until literally just listening to you in the past 5 minutes that I'm starting to connect the dots. It's how do you turn your clients, and maybe clients isn't even the right word, right? It's partners. You use the word partners. Turning them into partners, you said, give them a seat at the table. They are extensions of the product team. And to make them feel that way as a part of the team and that they have influence strikes at that definition that, I ultimately roll an entrepreneur up into is ownership. You're giving the client some ownership of your product, of your roadmap. And that's very powerful and incredibly valuable because, they're not on your payroll. They're doing this by their own volition and they see the value. And what better partner is it than that?
And it's helpful because when you're just starting off, you're embarrassed by your product. You really are. And it's hard when you don't have the resources of a big company and you're releasing your first product to encourage that feedback because you're afraid of what they're going to say. It's going to really touch your ego. And that's not a fun conversation to have. That's not a fun way to wake up in the morning. But when you do what we're talking about in a genuine and honest way, they're much more willing to deal with a product that's half baked because you are opening up to them and being vulnerable and asking them for feedback. And it really helps not feel as embarrassed. It really helps create a positive relationship and one that's not based on dissatisfaction with kind of what you're working on.
Yeah. Vulnerability is certainly, I think, one of those characteristics I think that comes up often when I'm speaking with others about, their leadership style or how do you model the behavior that you want to see? Because, the common theme I constantly hear about creating a culture where entrepreneurship can thrive is creating a safe place where people can voice their concerns and to share those things. And it's only by modeling maybe some of that vulnerability that people are willing to do that internally to your organization, but you're kind of taking this one step further and extending it to your customer and client base, which is, incredible. So I'm curious as a follow-up question, as you're thinking about structuring your internal team as you build Propify, right? You've got the client component I think we've talked about, but what is the right mix of skills or employees? How do you think about adding people to your team so that and then do that with intention so that they feel that, safe place, if you will?
Yeah. So, one of our investors and advisors, Mike Volpe, I remember he's talked about this concept of like when you hire folks, you want to hire folks that are broad and actually they can do a lot of different things. They're jacks of all trades with a spike in something that is like their superpower. And to make the sort of give an example of this, the software engineers we hire, they're great at software engineers, but I think that what really sets them apart from some of the other engineers that I've worked with, interacted with, is that they are deeply empathetic with our customers. They want to be on calls where they're directly interacting with customers and engaging with more than just the technical team. They want to be in the Slack channels, sort of like getting customer feedback in real time and helping to triage issues without, let's say, a support person sitting in between them and our users. And I think that like finding folks where, yes, they're good at what their job is, but they're bringing a lot more to the table and they're open to sort of being asked to stretch and expand what their role is. I think that allows you to have a company where, yes, people get hired for one thing, but if something comes up and we just need them to sort of lean in on something else, they don't look at that and say, well, that's not a part of my job description. They're like, that sounds super exciting. I've never done that before. Let's give it a try. And I think that like some of that is the skill set that they're bringing, but a lot of that's just the mentality that they're also sort of bringing to the table as well. And I think that like making sure that we hire people who have that diverse set of skills, but also that willingness and the openness to sort of stretch themselves is how we build a team that can really grow with the challenges that we face as a business.
And one thing I'll add there is one of our other investors, and we went through the Y Combinator program this past in last winter's batch. And one thing that they talked a lot about is do not hire because no one on your team wants to do a thing or you have not figured out how to do that thing. Hire when the founders have at least attempted and shown some success or have data points as to how that function could work, and then hire someone to fill in and do that and make it even better. And so selling is a perfect example. As opposed to hiring a sales rep, Remen and I have not really done that before. We need to figure out what the talk track is. We need to figure out what the sales assets are. We need to figure out how these conversations go before we ever can rely on someone to do that for us. And I think the message there is don't buy jobs to be done, solve them first, and then have people, as you are stretched too thin, kind of fill in those really critical roles.
Yeah, that's great advice. Sounds like you got some good investors and good advisors on the team. That's wonderful. So I'm really curious. You've benefited from some of these relationships with these advisors, and obviously we're talking very focused on the tech industry, on product development. But you both have experiences kind of outside tech as well. Do you think that hiring process or philosophy, I guess, is unique to technology, or do you think that the general tenets of what you're explaining can really benefit any industry?
I definitely think there are industries and companies and roles where you explicitly want to hire people who are super excited, super motivated, because like they're you explicitly want people who are going to push, who are going to challenge, and who have that desire to make things better. But I could also say, from my vantage point, having worked in consulted a number of other kinds of companies, that I unfortunately there are companies out there where they just sort of want someone who does shows up, does the job, and doesn't sort of like push too much. And I think that this really comes down to the type of company you're building. Are you trying to create a company where it's driven by growth, not just in terms of revenue and headcount, but at the individual level, people who are going to continue up level their skills and then find new skills that they want to bolt on to their current skill set? Or do you just want people who do their job really, really well? And that's sort of like the extent of what you're asking for. And while I think that having worked at, like, I know Ben and myself have definitely made some choices about the type of companies that we want to work at and then subsequently create for others. Folks might land on another decision themselves. But I think it's just like on an honest interrogation of what it is you actually want your employees, your staff, and your company to be focused on.
Hmm. Ben, do you agree? Disagree?
The only thing I would disagree with is I think even at like a big consulting firm, Remen's point about jack of all trades is an interesting one to me. I have generally seen the best employees I've worked with are those that are constantly consuming knowledge, not just directly tied to their specific role, but are just interested in learning and bettering in anything that they do. And oftentimes they have a lot of interests and they show this curiosity or this passion for improving or getting better or pushing themselves. And that always translates to whatever tasks you give them. And so I agree, maybe not having entrepreneurs at every single role where they're constantly challenging something that's working well just because they're interested in changing it and running with something on their own. But having individuals that bring a wealth of knowledge outside of that particular profession can bring an interesting perspective to problem solving, to conversations with customers or internal conversations that is, I have found to really level up teams.
Yeah. Yeah, as I'm kind of thinking about some of your responses, there's a couple themes I think that keep surfacing in my head. And Remen, you're kind of talking a little bit about self-awareness in a lot of ways, right? Understanding your position in the market or the company you're trying to build. And I wouldn't say every leader is as self-reflective as that, right? So maybe that's an opportunity. And Ben, you're talking about this thirst for knowledge, constantly learning, right? I mean, that's the word. We're thrown so much information in the modern era, right? But being able to consume it with intention to improve some aspect, even if you don't necessarily know what that aspect is when you're consuming the media, right? I think is very interesting. But both speak to the breadth, I think, that Remen you're kind of talking about, and I think that's kind of the root for me, at least, of innovation. And a lot of innovation is taking concepts from one area and applying it in a novel and unique way in another area. So the constant learning, constant exploration, that's where that's rooted in, and you never know when that light bulb's going to go off. So I think this is really, really valuable. I want to tie this conversation up with you both have a wealth of experience and have surrounded yourself with some very smart and individuals that have enabled your own personal growth and career. But if you each had to give one piece of advice to maybe your younger self, what is that advice? How do you help somebody on their path and their journey as they're trying to figure this out for themselves?
Yeah, I'm going to steal something that Ben just said. So he might be kicking me for this. But I think it's curiosity. If you are curious about how things work, how things can be improved. And that's just the general mindset and energy you bring to your work and to your personal life. That curiosity is going to pull you to explore. It's going to pull you to continue to question. And it's frequently that curiosity that's going to lead you to discover opportunities to do things better because you're thinking about more than just the thing right in front of you, but you're starting to sort of connect the dots between what you see on a day-to-day basis and all the other things that you're thinking about and like noodling through. And I think that really just like leaning into that curiosity and making it active. So it's one thing to say like, oh yeah, like I'm in a sales role, but I'm really curious about marketing. So I'm going to read a couple of marketing blogs. It's another thing to say like, hey, I'm interested in marketing, so I'm going to start reading these blogs and I'm going to start playing around with Chat GPT, and I'm going to try to figure out, can I build a marketing agency by myself using Chat GPT and like some off the shelf tools? And I think that that process of just like coming up with ideas, testing them out, even at like a really small scale. It doesn't have to be to make money. It doesn't have to be with a particular goal in mind. But that mindset of being a tinkerer who's always asking, exploring, and doing, I think that like that ultimately, it's something that's going to be shared. Entrepreneur, entrepreneur, both of them really have to bring that same approach to business.
So I'll give two tactical things that I think I wish I did better. So I'll lead with saying that I don't think I do these or have done these very well. And looking back, I wish I had. Remen's actually really is pretty good at this first one, which is I think it's very important, especially if you're early in your career, to reach out to people, knowing that you're most likely going to get rejected or not receive a response, but develop relationships with people in roles that you want to be in, and keep in touch, reach out, send them a birthday card, handwritten letters. Those types of, there are a few people that I've noticed in my career. My dad also does this very well. That is probably one of the single biggest reasons for their success, is their ability to connect with people and create that network. It is so important. It is not easy to do, but it just requires you to focus on and want to do it well. And then the other, I personally think getting good at or getting comfortable public speaking is really, really important. One thing that Remen and I have done a lot of is talk in front of people, mostly investors, and it is nerve-wracking. And being able to articulate your story in a calm, cool manner and work on that is important. And I think if people are really interested in changing the world or starting a business, being able to do that effectively is a skill that's important.
Yeah. Well, what great advice. And I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more since you asked it, Remen, and you brought it up. We'll keep it as short because we could do a whole nother episode on this, but you brought up ChatGPT. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, how are you thinking about AI in the confines of your own business?
Yeah, it really, really good question. I think that there's sort of two things that we're noodling on when it comes to AI. And so actually, one thing is what we're doing already. We definitely are using not ChatGPT, but I think Copilot. I think it's GitHub Copilot or something. We're like, there's code in our code base that was literally written by an AI. So there's certain things that for common functions, you can just like hand it off to an AI, but give it some parameters, and it writes great code that just works out of the box. So we're already using that to speed up some engineering processes. But where I think there's a really cool opportunity for us going forward, given that we're a company that integrates a lot of different data sources, standardizes them, well, that sounds like we have created a really good pipeline that if you slap a generative AI on the front end, could be answering a lot of questions about what's actually happening inside of an apartment building. What is it that residents are thinking about, talking about? Where are their maintenance issues? So I think that there are potentially some product opportunities that we're looking at down the line that will take this massive fire hose of data that we've started to corral and really try to channel it into something that's focused, it can deliver a lot of value for customers.
Yeah. Well, that's all really exciting. I can't wait to see some of this in action as your company continues to grow and develop new solutions. If folks want to stay in touch with what you both are doing and with what Propify is accomplishing, where can they find you?
Yep. So we can be found online at Get Propify. That's GetPropify.com. I'm also, Ben and I were also on LinkedIn. So feel free, if you're hearing the show and you want to connect, send me a connection request and just mention that you heard us on the podcast, and would love to connect with you there.
Yeah, same, LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This is an amazing conversation. Best of luck here in the future, and I'm sure we'll obviously keep in touch. So thanks again.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks again for listening to the Innovation Economy podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes at www.innovationeconomy.show or on your podcast platform of choice. The Innovation Economy podcast was created by the Agile Brand. Be sure to check out the Agile Brand Guide series of books, the Agile Brand podcast, and other resources for marketing, CX, and other enterprise leaders to manage change and transformation in their organizations. The Innovation Economy is proudly produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, let's keep innovating.
The Agile Brand.